when I get done recording this, I'm going to be sending a text message to my mom telling her that I'm bisexual. So hopefully that'll work out okay. Or that I think I might start using, well, I mean, you guys probably can already tell because of the video that you clicked on, but I think I'm going to start using pictures from the manga or the anime for the Higurashi videos here and there. Greetings, one and all, to the most cursed, most cringiest corner of the internet. A YouTube channel content creator actively alienating everyone in both the analog and digital world. Well, welcome and good evening, wonderful dice of all alignments. I am Lunar D8. View new tips. Article: Statistics from Ministry of Health and Welfare. Article 2, Definition of Child Abuse. The term child abuse means the following acts committed by a custodian, meaning a person who exercises parental authority, a guardian of a minor, or other person who is currently engaged in the custody of a child. Hereinafter the same shall apply against a child, meaning a person who is under 18 years of age. Hereinafter the same shall apply. Assault the child in a manner that will cause or is likely to cause external injury on the body of the child. Engage in indecency against the child or cause the child to engage in decency. Substantially reduce the amount of food for the child or abandon and neglect the child for a long period of time in a manner that may interfere with normal development, or the child mentally or physically, or otherwise materially fail to perform the duty of a custodian, or speak or behave in a manner that would significantly be traumatic to the child. Article 3. Prohibition of child abuse. No person shall abuse a child. Law number Act number 82 of 2000. Authored by Minister of Health and Welfare. Year 19. Something. Principal abuser. Remember, this game takes place in 1983, but it was made in like the early 2010s. Principal abusers in cases reported to the Ministry of Health and Welfare. Total: 5,352. Mother by blood: 2,943, 55%. Mother not by blood: 203, 3.8. Father by blood: 1,445, 25, 7%. Father not by blood: 9. Okay. I'm curious, are these actual statistics? And are these from, like, Japan? Are these from, like, 1983? Where did these statistics come from? Instances of types of abuse in cases reported Ministry of Health and Welfare. Total: 5,352. Physical abuse: 2,780. 51.9%. Neglect, abandonment of the child. Technically, that's also kind of Tepe just kind of leave for a fucking year. 1,700. Psychological abuse: 458. Hey! Psychological abuse doesn't leave scars. I am tempted to use this for a thumbnail. Yeah, I think I will. But yeah, I'm going to either, if I see a picture during the course of the video that I think it's good for a thumbnail, I'll use that. But if I don't, then I might try to use pictures from the manga or the anime. Forbidden from going to school. 75. Sexual violence. 311. Hey game, I noticed that all of a sudden the music kicked on with this one particular spot. I'm sure Satoko's fine. You know, this game did become an anime at some point. And there are certain things that certainly would never make it into an anime, right? But yeah, I kind of noticed that music kind of kicked on at that exact moment. Almost like something was supposed to be emphasized. It's like we're making a highlighter, but with sound. The die of fate had been cast. Okay, this music is a little more somber and a little more downtrodden. It's downright fucking sad and melancholic, okay? The die of fate had been cast. Reporting to a public agency, which we'd kept being warned could instead result in something far worse for Satoko if we didn't have evidence first. And just like that. Had I failed? Had I let my emotions get the better of me in that moment? Maybe I should have stayed silent and left everything to Mion, since she had been relatively calm. I remembered the punishment game where we had to badmouth Curry, and now me saying anything would have made it worse, and Satoko told us to leave the talking to her. Maybe it was the same thing here. I was impulsive. So maybe I should have just shut up and looked at the floor. But it was too late to lament it. The die I had thrown wouldn't be coming back into my hands. All we could do was pray for something good to happen. Keiichi-kun, you did everything you could. Keiichi could still talk to his parents, provided they're alive. So, leave it to the teachers now. Okay? Everything I could. If I really gave everything I had, if I had really struggled, I would have dragged Satoko out of her home last night and hidden her in some abandoned house. I didn't, so that means I didn't do everything I could. Stop thinking about it, alright? You're being a little too persistent, Keiichi-kun. At this rate, you'll collapse. Just leave me alone. I left her with those words and stared lazily up at the ceiling. I wondered if I'd really got Chie-sensei to understand. I'm sure she did. Would the public agency intervene and solve everything within the day? Would they acknowledge the abuse and guarantee her safety? After lunch break, our afternoon classes were mostly self-study. The teacher came back to the classroom occasionally, but then the phone in the lounge would ring and she'd have a long conversation with the caller. Everyone in class got the feeling that they knew what those phone calls were about. Sensei came trotting back from the classroom. I'm really sorry for all the phone calls recently. Let's call it a day. President, please lead the class. Everybody stand up. It looked to me like Sensei had been wearing a dark expression ever since after lunch break. It wasn't a very relieving expression. It wouldn't be, even if Sensei 100% understood the situation and passionately explained it to the other person. At the end, the Child Consultation Center, as a public agency, would be the ones to decide whether to get her to safety. Sensei understood, that as well as us, and that, wow, why she looked so unreliable right now. Kei-chan, let's go home. I don't think anyone feels like having the club today. Mi-chan, it's no fun if someone's not here. Rena was right. It was no fun for us if someone was missing. If the teacher's expression had shown more promise, then maybe we could have gone home more comfortably, but I couldn't let myself feel relieved. I couldn't be naive and tell myself all I can do is pray, now that the dice have been cast. Just in case they didn't get her to safety and decided to wait and see again, I'd need to take further measures. We've asked the people who could do something official already. It was good to talk to Chie about this, and Coach at least already knows. But we should definitely talk to our parents, Keiichi, even if there's no intention for them to adopt. But again, that would be a good suggestion to make to them. No matter what, even if we had never had the idea for our parents to adopt Satoko, we should still tell our parents about this situation. It's very important. Then there was one more place that was worth asking for help. She might laugh it off, or I might be right, and I could be endangering my own life. But I'd try. Oh, Mion, is it okay if I stop by your place today? You've got a lot of manga, right? I want to borrow a bunch of them. Huh? Sure, I guess. There was an ominous meaning behind my words, so Mion realized what I really meant right away. I wanted to talk about something alone. That's what I meant. Mi-chan, Keiichi-kun, let's go home. Rena already had her shoes on and was waving to us from the schoolyard. Mion's house was gigantic in every way imaginable. The house itself was a vaguely old-fashioned traditional Japanese house, but the yard, I guess, or their plot of land was enormous. It easily convinced me that they were major landowners with Hinamizawa under their thumb. Mion brought me through the guest room, and a servant brought us some tea. Wow, you really are rich, huh? You even got house. What happened in the timeline where you were murdering everyone, Mion? Where was that servant then? Was she also dead? Grandma and I are the only ones who live here. Even though the birds come in and out through your fucking roof all the time, and I wouldn't be able to do everything myself. The servant left, telling us it was 5 o'clock, then withdrew with soft footsteps. We have people come in and take care of Grandma and clean 2 or 3 times a week. They come in rotations of 3 or 4. So there is someone here almost every day. Only until evening, though. Oh, and if we're having a party or something where we need more help, we call up different people. If you had the money to hire all these people, then just take Satoko in. I glared at her as I thought that, and Mion seemed to catch on immediately. Oh, sorry. It's fine. I know it's not a money problem. Just to be clear, my family may be rich, but it's not money that I can use freely for myself, okay? I don't want you to misunderstand that. I understand that you don't have control of the bank account and that your grandma does, but again, that's why you talk to her and she makes that decision. Same thing with my parents. I understand financially it's a lot to ask, both money and many other ways to take in a child like Satoko, but at the very least one I can suggest to them and they can make their decision on their own. And even if, it were to be an outright no, it's still good for them to know about the situation. 1, they need to know what's on my mind. 2, they could perhaps give advice and encouragement to me. And also perhaps they can think of a better solution, even if they are not willing to adopt it all. It kind of looked like I was bullying her. Mion had been apologizing to me a lot lately. I wonder if she feels bad from the previous timeline. Was Mion the sort of person who would do that this much? Maybe it's just that I've been looking so grim lately. So, what's up? You had something to talk about, right? I have something pretty serious to discuss, Mion. This will be sudden, and you might be surprised, but I want you to hear me out. Huh? But what? Oh, I'll give you a way out first. Even if what I say is true, you don't need to admit it. You're allowed to play dumb. But I want you to listen until the end. I have something to say to the next leader of what's still the most important of the 3 families of Onokofushi village, Mion Sonozaki. At first, Mion looked like she had no idea what I was saying, but at hearing the whole sentence and putting it together, she reacted. I mean, she does have a full-size tattoo of a demon on her back. I think this is like Hanayama in the world of Baki the Grappler. She's also Winnie the Pooh. So apparently if you have a DBZ fusion of Winnie the Pooh and Hanayama from Baki the Grappler, you get a cute anime girl. Where did you hear that? It doesn't really matter. From the previous timeline, when you were talking about canned human flesh. I definitely couldn't tell her who told me. Oh, the woman from the shrine. I may not have been able to. They may not have let us, the viewers, see that scene, but I can at least put 2 and 2 together. Takano-san, you told me not to, but please forgive me. This is why I asked you about it after all. Well, I mean, we didn't say anything about... Technically, we haven't broken any part of that promise. 1, we didn't regret being told. 2, we didn't say it was Takano-san that told us. And 3, We asked who decides who suffers Oeshiro-sama's curse. I did not say anything to Mion about Oeshiro-sama's curse or her having any authority on who, suffers said curse. All I said is that you're the leader of this clan. Your grandma's old and you're the next in line. So I'm asking if perhaps you have a bit of authority to maybe... I'm not necessarily saying that you have the power of Oeshiro-sama's curse to kill Teppei. I'm not saying, talk to your parents who are active leaders of Yakuza to, kill Teppei and put a hit on him. Nor am I saying about your many relatives that are active senators and have high political affiliations to, use their political authority to kill him. But I'm just saying, hey, I understand that your family's pretty influential. Maybe, if there's anything in your family's power that would be of assistance to Satoko, I'm not saying what it is, maybe there's something you could do. Not even necessarily you. You could just mention to your parents and your grandma and the rest of your family about this situation. They can take the initiative and decision entirely on their own without us even suggesting they do anything. It could simply be they could decide on their own that it matters to them, especially if it matters to you, who they care about you, and obviously they know that you wouldn't be mentioning it to them if it wasn't something very important and someone who is your dear, dear friend who you love very much. For all of us in this club, we love each other as best friends. We're basically family. That being said, the rest of your actual blood family, well, they certainly care about you. And they know that you wouldn't bring this stuff up unless it was about someone that you really, really cared about. And you wouldn't be bringing it up unless it was something very important and grim and very dire and very urgent and very, very important. So I'm not necessarily saying for you to go to the Yakuza who are in your family and say, hey, can you please kill this bastard? I'm not saying that. I'm not even saying necessarily you be asking them to do anything. I'm just saying the same as I should probably go to my parents, whereas, I could ask them to adopt Satoko. Heck, you could even ask any members of your family to adopt Satoko. And again, you can't make them do that, and it's understandable they don't want to do that. But again, they could decide of their own volition. I should definitely go talk to my parents and ask them to adopt Satoko. They can say no, that's fine. I have no right to pressure them in any way. But the most important is this. I need to talk to them to let them know about the serious things that are on my mind and the stuff that's bothering me and the stuff that I think and feel. Because they're people that are supposed to be people that I can trust and who are supposed to care about me, if anything, more than anyone else in the world. If anything, they should be the people that you should be able to trust more than anyone else. The people that should care about your well-being and your best interest more than anything else. And shouldn't be angry at you for simply wanting to tell them what is on your mind and how you think and feel. So, at the end of the day, even if they can't adopt Satoko, that's fine. But if they could, that would be helpful. But if not, then it's still important that I talk to them, that they know what's on my mind, that they know how much it's something that I've thought about quite a bit in terms of what to do for Satoko to save her, and that it means a lot. And above all, that there is a situation going on where Satoko is being treated very, very poorly, and that it's very serious. One, so that they can at least be emotionally supportive to me, and possibly to Satoko if they meet her, even in the situation that they are not adopting her, and even more so in the situation where they are adopting her. But above that is they may have advice or some form of assistance. And even if they can't do anything or have anyone influential help themselves, should someone else be able to help Satoko, then at some point discussion would then come to my parents, and then them being informed ahead of time about this stuff would be of most help to Satoko. For example, if, say, your family, Mion, were to be able to adopt Satoko in any form, whether it be your grandma or your parents who live with Shion, you know, having the backing of, say, Coach and Chie, our teacher, and even, you know, verbal, you know, words of affirmation and support and belief from my parents, like say, like if you're a Yakuza parents that your sister Shion lives with, if they were to decide to actually adopt Satoko, Coach and our teacher and even my parents could all show up to the courtroom and, you know, speak about their support on it. But yeah, in regard to this, I'm not saying for you or your family to necessarily even asking that any of you do anything. I'm just saying, between you, especially being the heir of your family, this big, powerful, influential family, who has Yakuza, politicians, owns just about every store in this entire 100-mile radius, just talk to them. Explain to them what's going on. Don't even ask them to do anything. They'll get the point on their own about that you're implying that you want them to at least do something. We're not forcing them to do anything. We're not even suggesting what it is they do. And in fact, we're not holding it against them if they do or don't do anything. We're just, at the very least, they know how you feel about it, and they can at least give advice and encouragement or better solutions themselves. Now, that being said, if they choose to use any of the means at their disposal that we may or may not know exist in order to save Satoko's life and to save her from a horrible situation, that's entirely on them. That being said, if they want our assistance with that, I'm willing to help. I was surprised just that you'd heard of Onukafushi Village, Kei-chan. But you seem to know a lot of things, both true and false, about me too. I also wonder, same as the circumstances of each game change in each loop, since technically we're doing a time loop here, and the circumstances are different. I wonder if it's more than just the current circumstances that are unfolding during each loop, as far as who's being psychologically affected, who's getting possessed by demons, who's getting possessed by God, who's being influenced by certain things. And of course, certain characters are added or removed or put into various situations that cause different circumstances. There's even loops where people can remember previous loops. But I wonder, from each loop, are we not only changing current events of the loops, but is it possible that during each and every loop that things in the past are being changed? For example, is it possible that in this loop, the entire canned flesh incident and a lot of the stuff about how the Sonozakis got their start didn't occur? Is it possible that certain things, like, I'm not saying major changes, but it could be that in addition to current events in each loop being changed, and new characters being introduced or different timelines occurring within each new timeline reset. Is it possible that past events from decades before we were even born, Mion, are being changed with each loop and are able to be freely changed by Oyashiro-sama? Is it possible that we have like a Chrono Trigger type situation occurring? So that not only are we having multiple loops occurring that seem to affect our long-term memory where we know things we shouldn't know via other loops, but we don't know it's from other loops, and we don't know the things that are fourth wall breaking about the loops. Like, I can remember certain sports events or curry events that occurred in other loops, but I don't remember, the whole beating you and Rena to death with a baseball bat because I thought you were going to try to murder me. Same as you don't remember the loop where you butchered Satoko and Rika-chan and then murdered a bunch of other people, shocked me with a stun gun, then fell down a fucking tunnel in like a Vietnam style, war tunnel where you fell like down a ladder and broke your neck, and then your ghost started traveling around stabbing people to death. But at that point, the ghost isn't even you. At that point, it's just Oyashiro-sama traveling around in a physical sense, either possessing your corpse or manifesting as a physical ghost but in your appearance. There's also the situations where you have space aliens that have come from another dimension via a Stargate that are trying to reincarnate by fusing into the minds of people our age, and well, they're basically trying to override us like the fucking Goa'uld from Stargate SG-1, but we're not really aware of it and they're not fully in control, and it's basically causing a psychological break because there's ghosts trying to override our mind like they're the fucking computer chip thing out of Cyberpunk, with Johnny Silverhand, Keanu Reeves. It's a PlayStation game. You guys have heard of Keanu Reeves, right? He's cool. That being said, there's also the fact that there is a brain parasite that fucks up part of your brain, causes severe paranoia, hallucinations, aggression, emotional instability. It also makes you have not only visual and auditory hallucinations, but also makes you scratch your neck a whole lot, thinking that there's maggots crawling under, and you're actually seeing maggots under your flesh, and you're scratching at yourself a lot from both the stress and from the itching irritation. But usually it causes such severe psychological stress that you scratch your throat so much that you actually scratch your own throat out of your mouth, you scratch your esophagus out of your throat and bleed to death because you're basically ripping your jugular vein out of your own neck by scratching so much. Basically, it's a mix of a lot of, sometimes people are just doing things and blaming it on the curse. Sometimes there's people having psychological breakdowns from a completely scientific explanation of brain parasites that are local to this region because of the fucking swamp. Also because the people here have a dispensity for there are situations of eating human flesh, and that has not only a significant psychological effect, but also the act of eating human flesh not only is a psychological issue, but it also causes physical changes to the brain. So not only is it a psychological issue of, oh, you're eating human flesh, obviously you're like, oh, you have to be kind of fucked up or some serious situation happening. Heck, even if you're someone who was forced to eat human flesh against your will, or you wind up eating human flesh not knowing it's human flesh, you find out later, obviously that'd be a huge psychological issue for you to deal with. But there's also the fact that any species, including humans, that is not naturally cannibalistic, simply put, any species that is not normally supposed to eat their own kind, because there are some species out there that are perfectly like it's completely common and normal for like every member of that species to be eating other members of their own species. Some species are like that. In fact, I would dare say there's more than half of species on the planet Earth that are active cannibals. And it's completely normal for those species. Those species that actively engage in cannibalism as a normal facet of what they're supposed to do, there is no negative effects for them. But for the species that are not normally cannibalistic, those species, if engaged in cannibalism, suffer serious repercussions. Simply put, most species that are not, like I would say most, like there are more species on planet Earth that are cannibalistic that are not. In fact, it is less common for animals to not eat their own kind. But of course, predominantly we... Hold on, I'm going to see what that noise is. What is that? Let me take the headphones off. I hear like a banging sound. I'll be back. Sorry. I'm back. I don't know if you guys can hear that banging sound or not. I went downstairs thinking that maybe it might be someone knocking on the neighbor's doors, something. Certainly their dog does not like it. Oh, I got a can of... Oh, it's downstairs. I got this. Can you guys hear that banging? But... yeah, I had a can of like this sparkling water stuff. It's called Spindrift. It's got blood orange and tangerine. It's actual fruit. It's 12 calories. It's got 3 grams total carbohydrates 3 grams and total sugars 2 grams. The ingredients are carbonated water, blood orange juice, tangerine juice, and citric acid. It says it's unsweetened. I have not tried this before. I'm gonna give it a shot. Oh, by the way, that banging sound, there is a thing that's causing it. I live in an apartment complex. Oh wow, that's actually really delicious. Anyway, it's maintenance guy. apparently he's doing repairs to something on my front porch. So he's out there banging it with a hammer. I look through the little peephole of my front door, and yeah, it's the maintenance guy. He's on a little step stool, and he's banging on... He's putting nails and stuff into this thing on my front porch. So I had no idea that anyone was going to be doing repairs on that. I mean, that's been falling apart for a while. I mean, if anyone's watched the videos I've shown on my front porch, yeah, you've seen how that one white pole has like gradually been starting to... So, yeah, I guess that's getting repaired. Okay, we're back to cannibalism. Anyway, like I said, many species are very cannibalistic. But any species that is not normally cannibalistic suffers physiological problems if fed their own kind. Usually some animals will engage in cannibalism. They're not supposed to, but usually it's because there's already something wrong with them physically, or because they've had some major psychological issue. And usually when it gets to that point, the animals in question basically go insane and are basically like violent zombies. I know I'm, using a bit of a euphemism there. Some actually are literally violent zombies, but more to the point that what I mean by that is they behave with increased aggression and are just a threat to everything around them at that point. To a large degree, this is true of humans. In most situations, humans do not engage in cannibalism unless there is either something physically already wrong with their brain or some psychological issue going on. Though, of course, there are times where a human will engage in cannibalism due to some severe, famine situation. If you're starving to death or you're locked up somewhere like, say you're like in a cabin and there's like a huge avalanche or something. That's really delicious. Anyway, main point is this. Obviously, a little here and there. Who's to say how much that would affect it? I'd say it's more of a gambling roulette thing. Heck, have you guys heard of genetic roulette? Well, it's cool that humanity can edit a bit of genetics when it comes to a lot of foods. We've done that with some foods to try to make them more nutritious or grow better or be more resistant to certain diseases or pests. The problem is, one, it's hard to say what effect changing a food like that would have on humans who consume it. Or say if we feed it to other animals and then we eat those animals. But then there's also the fact of the matter is this. It can have other unintended effects of society or of nature, but also is this. When you change, and of course we're getting better at editing genetics, both in plants, animals, and even in humans. But the problem is this. It's something that we really don't know enough about, and the problem is that anytime you change something in one part of a genetic sequence, there's a chance that it could randomly alter other things. You're basically causing a mutation. And the problem is, sometimes when a mutation occurs, it can cause further mutations. It's kind of like the idea if you had a huge, long math equation and you just put a +2 anywhere in the equation. Well, especially if it's... My ear itches. Especially if it's a type of equation where you're trying to chart something on an XY axis. It can really change. Especially say if you were putting in a very complex mathematical equation to create, say, a fractal pattern. A very small change to that equation can cause a lot of... Especially if the equation were to get re-putted over and over and over again. Same thing with a computer. You change something with the data, it can cause a glitch. And sometimes those glitches can compound. So, I can't say I really know very much about how that stuff works. And we're getting off topic. But I'm saying mutations can occur both naturally or caused, and anytime there is a mutation, usually that's a chance where the mutation can then cause further mutations. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. Many people that argue that's largely how evolution would work, and also that there's a thing called gyruses. Technically, this word is the word virus, but of a G instead of a V. Viruses are technically classified as things that are not alive. However, gyruses are technically function just like a virus, but they're much, much larger than a virus. In fact, in many cases, they're actually larger than bacteria. And in many cases, they actually will eat viruses, the small, normal ones. That being said, gyruses tend to have an effect on organic matter around them. It is said that in many situations, when it comes to any sort of mutation that occurs in an organic anything, it is said that largely gyruses may be responsible for that. However, again, all of this is kind of conjecture. Same as I was saying with the loops, not only are things changing during the current state of each loop, but things could be changing in the distant past. Think of it like the Mandela effect. That sort of thing. But we were talking about cannibalism, and I keep getting distracted. My bad, I'm sorry. Though that does remind me. Obviously, you guys are familiar with things like tofu. Correct? There was a thing at one point made, I think a decade or two back, called hufu. I don't know how they figured out this flavor profile, but the main target demographic or audience for this product called hufu, it's tofu, but H-U-F-U instead of T-O-F-U, it was human-flavored tofu. It was tofu that was meant to have the flavor of human flesh. Now, of course, you're like, who's the demographic audience for this? It was meant for anthropology students. And of course, I've never tried this, and I would never want to try this. But it's interesting that somebody bothered to try to make human flesh-flavored tofu with the idea of giving it to anthropology students and the idea that they would help them better understand ancient cultures. I kind of feel like you don't need to try something in that situation. Even if it's tofu that's just made from like soybeans and stuff. That's, flavored. And again, how did you figure out what human flesh flavoring was? And even then, how did you make that flavoring? It's like, one, how do you figure out what that flavor profile is? Like, how do you make something taste like human flesh? Like, how did you know? What did you know? Like, how? Like, there's questions there. There's also, what did you use to make that flavor? And how did you figure that out? And also, why? Okay, we're getting off topic. Okay, the main point is this. Any species that is not normally cannibalistic, if fed a member of its own kind, it causes actual physical damage to the brain. Now, it can cause other genetic issues, even issues with DNA, even issues with down to the cellular level, even hormonal changes, and even effects on, your internal organs. But predominantly, above all other things, if you were to feed any animal, including a human, their own species, their own kind, it's even more pronounced if it's a closer in race or closer in blood. What I mean by that is this. You would suffer any human that would be fed another human's flesh would suffer physical damage to their brain. Basically, they would suffer a type of brain damage that would be exponential. It's not quite cancer, but in a way it kind of functions like cancer, but it's a very different concept. In fact, it's a concept we're very familiar with from 2 decades ago. It was a very huge problem for a lot of Europe and America. Mad cow disease. Cows, basically farmers were trying to save some money, and there was a lot of cows that got sick and died, and the meat wasn't good for selling, for steaks and stuff. Basically, it wasn't good enough condition to use for the butchers. But they didn't want to waste, and they were short on feed for the cows. So, while many cows eat naturally grass, or sometimes they're fed things like corn and stuff like that. In fact, a lot of times, sometimes grocery stores will sell, market it specifically as, oh, here's meat that's from a cow that's been entirely grass-fed, and, no hormones were introduced to the cow. Because it's said that it changes the flavor and nutritional profile of the meat. That being said, sometimes people would feed corn and stuff to their cows. Maybe there's just not enough grass. Maybe it causes the cows to fatten up more. That being said, in the interest of saving money, because they didn't have enough feed for the cows, they would take the mixes of feed, including corn and other stuff like that, and they'd mix in the flesh of other dead cows, and they would feed the dead cows to the other cows. Maybe in some situations they would have to add in flavorings and stuff. For example, milk is extraordinarily healthy for you, but honestly, you're better off getting the better quality milks that are more filtered and all that. In fact, many situations have lactose taken out. But a lot of times you have higher quality milk that has more protein and less sugar in it. That being said, a really good reason to have the higher quality milk is because no matter what, the lower quality milks do tend to have hormones or other things introduced. Also, due to the fact that they're not filtered and that they're from sometimes overproduction situations, it causes a immunoresponse within the cow, which causes the cow to produce a decent amount of pus. So what will happen is your average gallon of milk will actually have a pretty decent amount of pus inside the milk, but you can't taste it due to the natural sweetness of the milk. But if you were to get low quality milk, there's actually pus inside that milk. Now, of course, if you get higher quality milk that's actually filtered properly, then that pus is out and you're actually getting purer, better milk that's actually much, much better for you and causes much less inflammation. In fact, I would say in many situations, if a milk is irritating you, a lot of times it's lactose, but it's also sometimes it's that pus that's getting to you. And of course, conditions for a lot of cows and stuff are better nowadays than they were in the past. There were some times where the cows were so overmilked that there would actually be blood inside the milk. That's actually why chocolate milk started to be a thing. People found that certain batches of milk had a noticeable amount of pus and even blood inside. So there was already discoloration not only from the increased amount of pus, but because even your normal white milk will have pus in it unless it's ultra filtered, which I would strongly suggest getting that type of milk instead of your average milk. And of course, things are better nowadays than they were in the past. And of course, America's very good about pasteurizing milk. But of course, that's not enough to fix other things. You should be aware of a lot of things going on with your food. Now, that being said, chocolate milk originally began because a lot of milk was in very poor condition to the point that there was not only an increased amount of pus, but there was actively blood from the cows where the cows started bleeding into the milking machines from being over-milked or poorly treated, and that blood would be in the milk. So the idea then is that you would then add chocolate syrup or something to the milk. So by adding the extra sugar and the extra chocolate, you change the color and the flavor, which then masks the color and the flavor of the pus and blood. Now, obviously, milk is much better nowadays. Of course, that's not like that any nowadays. But again, if you want chocolate milk, I would strongly suggest just getting the ultra-filtered, very clean, very pure milk, and then just adding Hershey's chocolate syrup. It's delicious, by the way. Same way, ketchup originally got its start by farmers would have a great deal of tomatoes, but many of those tomatoes were not fit to even send to the market to sell. So what they would then do is they would take the tomatoes that were not ripened properly or had started to rot, and they would mash those down and add a bunch of seasonings and salt and sugar and stuff to use it as ketchup. Maybe even colorings. Now again, ketchup itself is much higher quality nowadays than what it was back then. But back then, that and many other things originally came about as means of saving money and also making sure that not only the farmers could make more money, but also food, a lot of times back then, was much more scarce. So you were trying to not starve to death. Heck, in the Victorian era, a lot of times people would, bakers would mix in like little bits of chalk or even little bits of gravel into the bread as fillers. Some plants in other parts of Asia will sometimes mix in plastic or cardboard into their rice or their grains to try to be a filler. Obviously, this is extraordinarily unhealthy for you. So, and of course, in the most recent decades, we've added a lot of chemicals, especially many types of preservatives to food, that extend the shelf life of a lot of foods, making it to where they don't spoil for a much longer period of time. Which, on the one hand, that's extremely amazing because it allows food to travel much further than normally would, and there's many people that would actively be starving to death if we hadn't invented those things. But there are arguments about the effects of those chemicals or preservatives or even other additives that are taking place and their effects on humans who ingest it. Many could say you could take sandwiches from, say, a McDonald's or something and set it out and just leave it be for a while, and the question is, how long until it starts to spoil? Or doesn't spoil at all? And the fact is this, if you take food and you introduce chemicals that prevent it from decaying, normally like food should, the question is, what effect does that have on humans when we ingest it? Then again, there's the question of the amount of microplastics that are being introduced to human bodies, or the amount of, heck, they've done studies, they found that human testicles in men, or even fetuses that are still growing in a woman's womb, actively already have microplastics in them. Then again, nature adapts. For example, there's a type of deep sea fungus that we didn't even know about, and it wasn't very common because it's natural. Basically, it can eat certain types of nutrients, but for the most part, the types of nutrients it has are not very common. So it's not a very common type of fungus. It's a type of deep sea fungus that lives specifically in the ocean. So this is a fungus mold sort of stuff, but it specifically lives in water, particularly in dark parts of the ocean. So it lives in very, very heavy salinated water. So water that's especially salty, and it's, in the ocean. And particularly in places where there's less light and there's more increased pressure. And generally environmental circumstances that humans would not necessarily live very well at. However, we have not only noticed that this type of fungus is becoming more... The species is growing much faster than normal, and it's adapting. By that I mean this. We have found that the chemical profile of this type of fungus actually allows it to eat and break down forms of plastic and resin that we normally would consider not even able to be recycled, and stuff that we would think that would take hundreds and hundreds of years to break down. This fungus naturally has an ability to sort of break it down, albeit slowly, but much like mushrooms on a rotting log in the forest. However, we're also noticing that it's adapting. That, one, this fungus is responding to the increase in the presence of things that it can treat as food. And so it's growing in number and becoming much more noticeable population of this in the ocean. Heck, did you know where the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean meet? They don't mix. The types of water are different, and technically the water from the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean have different chemical profiles. And the regions where those types of oceans meet, the water refuses to mix. In fact, if you were to take a bottle of just straight up water out of the middle Pacific Ocean, and then took a jet and were to take water straight up out of the middle of the Atlantic, and then you were to fly to a place nowhere near either ocean, and then you were to take a bottle of each and try to pour it into a big bowl with each other, the water from each ocean would still refuse to mix. Even if you stirred it, the water from each ocean would absolutely refuse to mix. It's almost like, imagine different blood types in humans. You can use transfusions in humans to give someone blood if they've lost blood or have a medical condition, but it has to be the correct blood type, or else it won't mix. Same thing with organ transplants. Not only do you have to deal with different chemical profiles and hormonal balances, but you also have to deal with immunoresponses. Heck, I think what TV show was it? There was a thing about how... Was it The Last of Us? I don't know. It was a TV show where it started off with a thing about a scientist talking about how mushrooms and fungus could be dangerous to humans if it could adapt to the higher temperature that humans operate at compared to the things that they normally go after. In fact, there's a lot of things that are held into by a very, very narrow balance. Heck, take the Earth's magnetosphere. Our atmosphere protects us from ultraviolet radiation as well as solar storms, though still severe solar storms could still possibly knock out all electricity on the planet and knock the satellites out of the sky. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But that being said, it does cause interference, and a lot of times you see aurora borealis. That's because of that. Now, that being said, the Earth's magnetic North Pole is not static. It moves a bit, but it generally stays close to the same region. Now, if it were to move drastically, then, and by drastically I mean even by hundreds of miles. I'm not talking about like a pole flip or some bullshit like that. I'm just saying a massive movement, it would have effect on things. Now, that being said, it does move, albeit slowly, but we've noticed an accelerating change with that. But at least it should be nothing that's majorly concerning. It's the same way with tectonic plates. You know how the continents used to be Pangea at one point. Technically, the massive plates of the Earth's crust are moving, just not very quickly. Technically, part of Africa is starting to split open, and technically, like Los Angeles and part of California are supposed to break off from the rest of the United States. But that's supposed to take a very long period of time, like millions of years. Also, of course, you have to deal with the jet streams of the oceans. You have like air currents, which of course we have active air currents in the air, but also we have things like in the underwater, like the Gulf Stream. Think of it like massive energy rivers, like blood veins that are going through the ocean, where there's pockets of where part of the ocean is traveling faster than the rest of the ocean. Technically, that's also a thing that's occurring both in space and even inside the Earth itself, like underneath the crust, where all the basically lava is. Simply put, there's a lot what we don't know about it, but we know that what we do know about it is that liquid, magma sort of center between the core and the crust takes up most of the Earth. The crust is not very thick, even though it's very deep as far as humans are concerned, as far as, from our perspective, how big we are. Most of the planet is not, the surface. And even then, there's like sort of jet streams of that stuff too. So if any of that stuff were to change, it would have devastating consequences for us. Heck, if we're talking about like stuff like climate change and the way stuff is on global scale, if the jet streams in the oceans were to change, that'd be devastating. Heck, in the year 536 AD, there was a giant volcano that went off in the middle of the ocean. Now, most people around the world had no fucking clue that a volcano exploded. But the increase in the volcano kind of messed with the way the sun's light and energy gets to the earth. And what that did is it kind of cooled the earth for a bit. Not majorly. In fact, the winter wasn't really much colder than normal. The biggest problem is that when it came to summer, the summer was extraordinarily mild. So winter wasn't really much colder than normal, but the summer was much more mild, which made it where a lot of the areas didn't properly thaw correctly. This led to a lot of major loss of crops, and it also led to a lot of areas becoming more swamp and marshy for a while. It increased the amount of famine and disease by a massive amount, so it caused a lot of illness and sickness and death. And that was 536 AD. Now that being said, there was also a time long before that, shortly after the Greek civilization started to fall away a little bit. It was around the Mesopotamia areas and all that area. Basically, there was a shift in weather back then, though this is like 2,500 years ago, I think. And that caused a major issue where they had lost a lot of crops, to the point that many powerful nations that were around there that were actually very influential actually had collapses of society, where you had entire nations basically collapse. You even had, like, I think Greece itself, and that those regions had a lot of power, and they basically loss of crops, loss of life. Financially, that's a huge thing. I mean, heck, there was issues even during the medieval period of time, and even during the Renaissance that affected different parts of the world like that. In fact, one could really say that if there was an absolute major issue with crops in America, that it would probably be enough to not only cause a major widespread amount of death, but also a huge economic issue. In fact, back when the Great Depression happened, due to over-farming, a lot of the soil was stripped out of parts of... That's why it was called the Great Dust Bowl, because a lot of the soil got stripped. So what happened then is the windstorms wind up damaging it more, and because the soil was so stripped, it came up so easily. And so then you had whole areas where the ground actually went down by several feet down to the fucking clay. And you couldn't grow shit in that. So now you can't grow crops at all. And even then, before that, a lot of times the soil had less nutritional profile for the plants themselves. Made it harder for plants to live, and when the plants did, there was less of them, and there were less nutrition for the humans or animals that would eat them. In fact, that's also largely why we have certain regulations about when to grow certain crops to prevent that from occurring again. Also, when the dust storms happen, a lot of times that soil that was already stripped would then get dumped in places, burying entire towns. But we made corrections on that, and we have regulations in place to prevent that from occurring anymore. That's also another reason why we grow new types of crops, because some crops are better for the soil, and some crops and some plants help the soil to be stronger. And of course, there's also things like nitrogen balance in terms of the air and the soil. That is very important to keep in mind. I feel like I've gotten really off topic. We're trying to talk about cannibalism, and now I'm talking about nitrogen and beans. And perhaps even peanuts, one could say. Anyway. Main point I was trying to go with is this. Mad cow disease. It's a thing. It's called prions. And it's a type of protein chain that's particularly important, especially in your brain. What happens with a prion is that it's a protein chain that becomes folded in an incorrect way due to a mutation that is non-favorable. Now, the problem with this, it functions basically like fucking cancer and spreads maliciously. And these protein chains make neural networks in the human brain that are non-functional. Thus, it basically causes Hinamizawa syndrome. Though Hinamizawa syndrome in this situation is a brain parasite that's a type of worm that messes with your brain. But when you die, the worm completely dissolves and there's no trace of whatsoever, which means the only way to find active evidence of Hinamizawa syndrome in the human brain is to do a live biopsy, not an autopsy, because you do an autopsy, there's no trace. But if you do a live biopsy, you can find it, which means you have to literally cut the person's brain open while they're still alive. Now, technically, this is also why pork and shellfish were banned in many cultures, including old-style Jewish religion. And again, I'm a Christian, I believe in God, and that's of course the same God of the Jewish Bible. But of course there's many things that are laws that are set in like Deuteronomy and Numbers and Leviticus that are not religious laws from God. They're not things you have to do in order to be a good moral person. These laws instead are there because they have some major benefit or function for society as a whole. In fact, there's rules about how to scrape out mold out of a cave or a house, and that certain things that if it keeps coming back, you have to condemn the building and burn it down. That rule exists for the sake of, well, the same reason we would condemn a house where asbestos is. Also, it'd be interesting to look back on things where people might have an understanding on things like radon, because radon didn't just suddenly start existing a couple hundred years ago, or say using lead in paint, or at one point we used lead in gasoline. It was supposed to improve functionality of those things, as well as to be cheaper, but then we eventually realized that perhaps lead is not safe for human consumption, or to be burned around us. Heck, that reminds me, at one point in the past, people thought that tomatoes were poisonous. Though keep in mind, a lot of plants and things have been changed over time. We have crossbred a lot of plants and animals to make new species. And of course, nowadays we have genetic modified organisms, GMO. But at one point, most species of bananas or watermelons and oranges were completely inedible. For example, like there was a type of fruit called a citron, which is the closest thing you have that was actually something edible. But for the most part, oranges, tangerines, lemons, limes, watermelons, bananas, as we know them today, did not exist even 1,000 years ago. Even 1,000 years ago, those plants did not exist the way we know them now. Technically, bananas have two different forms. There's the bananas and there's plantains, which are both edible. Plantains are more of a salty, savory sort of flavor compared to the sweetness of a banana. And of course, many of the conditions for raising bananas are kind of dangerous. Tarantulas fucking love living on those things. It's perhaps very, very dangerous for the people growing that shit. In fact, back when they originally were harvesting sugarcane, that was extraordinarily dangerous and sometimes made a bit of a sticky type of tar stuff that was sometimes would get on people and cause horrifyingly painful third-degree burns that would kill people. A lot of those jobs were very dangerous. Fuck, there was something else I was thinking about in terms of food. Shit, there was a thing. Memory, please. Why is my memory so bad? I mean, technically banana trees are clones of each other at this point, because of the way we genetically altered them. But technically, old forms of bananas weren't edible. Watermelons didn't have much flesh at all to them. Lemons, all this stuff really didn't exist. They didn't have flavors. And most part, there was a thing similar to an orange, but it really didn't have much nutrition, and you had to boil it in order to eat it. Of course, we changed that stuff since then. Oh! I remember what I was thinking. Molasses and tallow. Heck, one could also say margarine and imitation butters and types of oils. I mean, heck, there's some types of oils, like a castor seed, I think, or rapeseed oil or something like that. There was a type of seed that at one point that was ground down to make oil for machines. And then, there was a whole industry built around it. But then once we found out that, we didn't need it for the machines anymore, they still wanted to be able to sell their products. We started using it for cooking oil. But of course, people concerned about either nutritional issues of that or about, flavor. So obviously it was something that initially started as being used for machines, for lubricant. And then we started cooking with it. But then there were concerns about, one, do you like that flavor? And two, is it actually healthy for humans to ingest something that was initially created purely for the sake of lubrication for machines? Heck, at one point during World War II, we were grinding down rose hips for the flour in order to make vitamin C supplements. And again, vitamin C is very important. If you don't have it, you technically get scurvy. Vitamin C helps your immune system. Also, it helps your body maintain certain tissues in your body, including scar tissues, even for internal issues. Hypothetically, if you were to have scurvy, not only would your immune system fall apart, but without appropriate vitamin C, your flesh, particularly in parts of organs or scar tissues, would start to kind of decay and start to bleed. So, obviously, there's lots of nutritions like iron and stuff. Your body needs those things. But in too high of a dose, it will kill you. And too low of a dose, it will kill you. Tallow. I think it was during the time of Napoleon Bonaparte in France that they started making tallow from, I think, ground cow bones in order to make a butter substitute. It was in the interest of, one, preventing famine so that people wouldn't die of starvation, and two, it was meant to be a way to make something that tastes like butter available more commonly for people that were too poor to afford butter, because we really couldn't produce that much butter and it was more costly back then. So it was meant to be a cheap alternative for people that couldn't afford or couldn't get butter. Molasses is a very delicious thing, but at one point, and of course there's different forms of sugar and different forms of sweeteners. And of course, as time goes on, we've made new forms of sweeteners. Some were meant to be sugar-free alternatives to give you flavor, be healthy, but then there's other concerns about the effects that has on the human body, whether it be on appetite, liver, kidneys, and brain, or even on mood. But yeah, we've altered a lot of things with food. Heck, I think there's a lot of food that's delicious. I mean, pizza and ice cream's absolutely phenomenally delicious. But it's interesting to look back. Oh, right, I was going to say tomatoes were poisonous. Technically, while there are different species of tomatoes nowadays, and of course, tomatoes have gone through a lot of changes themselves over time, and we've even genetically modified some of the tomatoes themselves to make them more resistant to types of mold or insects that would eat them. That banging is a little annoying, but nothing I can do about it. There's also the fact that at one point, people thought, especially royalty, thought tomatoes were poison. Heck, there was also a health condition called gout at one point, where if you were, usually it was considered king's disease. The idea is that if you ate nothing but meat, like chicken, all the time, because usually it was the royalty that had more access to meat like that, but if you ate a lot of that stuff back then without certain other nutrients that we have more commonly in vitamin supplements nowadays, you would start to get gout, which would be a type of inflammation that would be extremely painful, if not debilitating, to the point that if you had gout, you were in horrible pain, and it was hard to even walk. And heck, I really don't blame people in the past for being alcoholics back then, Because one, life sucked back then. You didn't have pizza, you didn't have ice cream, you didn't have anime, you didn't have air conditioning, there was constantly war, famine, and disease all the time, and life just fucking sucked. I mean, if somebody lived back even in the Renaissance times, let alone medieval or feudal eras, or even before that, I don't think I'd blame someone for drinking alcohol a lot. One, there was less clean water available, let alone nowadays we have super clean water that's cold and we can even add ice to it, which is awesome. And even flavorings. Heck, how much soda and energy drinks exist nowadays? But heck, juice. Just a big glass of Florida orange juice. That's fucking delicious. Heck, a lot of times I water it down because it's too fucking sweet. But here's the thing. There's also the changes in different foods that are available and effects it has on people. But I don't blame people in the past, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, for drinking. One, life sucked. You didn't have anime. I mean, come on. A world without anime? I mean, you might have to start drinking then. You can't play any video games? I mean, I guess you kind of have to start drinking. But more to the point, my facetious joking aside, is that aside from the fact you don't have clean water readily available, a lot of times the low alcohol content beers would be, one, your best source of water, which mostly the germs in it were killed, not because of the alcohol, but because of the distilling process. But the main point is a lot of times water itself tasted even worse, wasn't clean, wasn't cold, and a lot of times if you drank normal water, you would just die. You'd get sick. Whereas if you were to drink a low-quality, watered-down beer that usually was less alcohol than most beers nowadays, you wouldn't get sick because the distilling process killed all the germs and bacteria that otherwise could have caused horrible illnesses. Also, there are some calories in beer, which would help you not starve to death. More to the point is this. Ibuprofen, Tylenol, painkillers for the most part did not exist. So if you had like back pains or pulled a muscle or broke a bone or had a horrible migraine or had an infected tooth or an earache, I mean, you didn't have Advil or Tylenol, so what else could you do in order to, kill the pain? I mean, here's the thing. I don't like headaches. Heck, I've had a lot of migraines in the past. I mean, Advil and Tylenol and Excedrin were fucking godsends. If that stuff didn't exist, I probably would have no hesitation to drink alcohol if it meant, making it where my head wouldn't be pounding in horrible pain. Or imagine if somebody actually, sprained their back or broke their leg. I mean, you don't have Tylenol or Advil, so heck, there's sometimes I'll take Advil or something if I'm like being very physically active in my job and I'm like kind of sore and I need to be able to keep moving. But again, at least not as bad as my previous job. My previous job was, I was like basically living off caffeine and Advil and stuff back then just because that way that job was, it just was not healthy. But yeah, people thought tomatoes were poisonous if they were rich. The reason for that is because a lot of times the rich people in these situations would be having plates that they'd be eating off of that were made out of pewter. And in of itself, under most normal circumstances, pewter is safe to eat off of. However, tomatoes, while not poisonous, are acidic. And if you were to eat tomatoes on a pewter plate, the acid from the tomatoes would leach chemicals out of the pewter that would normally not be accessible, that would normally, like if you were to just like if you were to have a bowl made out of like milk, not a bowl, but if you were to have a bowl made out of pewter and you were to pour milk and eat cereal out of your fucking pewter bowl, you'd probably be fine. Like I said, I would assume milk wouldn't, because milk's not an acid, right? So, right? I don't know, depends on how acidic milks are. How acidic is milk compared to tomatoes? I'm just saying this. Hypothetically, if you were to have like pour orange juice into that bowl, you'd kill yourself, okay? Because orange juice is very acidic. Technically, Pepsi is very acidic too, especially the phosphoric acid. But we add a lot of sugar and stuff in there, so you really can't taste it. But there are concerns that it's not very good for your bones. But the main point is this. You would eat tomatoes on a pewter plate, and the acid from the tomatoes would leach out the chemicals that are poisonous. So the tomatoes in themselves are not poisonous at all. But if you were to eat tomatoes on a plate made out of pewter, the acid in the tomatoes would leach out chemicals that would be poisonous and deadly to you. Okay, we got off topic. Main point being, any species that is not normally cannibalistic, if forced to eat its own kind, the brain has issues where it suddenly starts functioning incorrectly. There starts being physical damage to the brain, which not only causes impairment, because obviously brain damage causes impairment, to emotional and intellectual faculties. So 1, you may be less intelligent. 2, you may be more impulsive. 3, you may hallucinate. 3, you may be just have emotional imbalances, because a lot of times your brain is responsible for, well, everything. And, well, obviously if all of a sudden your brain is either not functioning correctly, or parts of it are damaged, or if your serotonin, dopamine, or other chemical levels are being thrown completely out of whack and in a very unbalanced way, it can cause a huge psychological influence on the person. So not only the person be less intelligent, more impulsive, but the person could be very emotionally and psychologically unbalanced and even violently insane. To a large degree, these things are very similar to Hannibal syndrome. Oh, that reminds me. The thing about the Jewish thing. Many religions in the past have customs saying don't eat pork or shellfish. Now, of course, I was talking about the mold thing in buildings, but there's many laws. For example, there's certain rules about not wearing fabrics of more than one type. And of course, there's provisions against not having tattoos or piercings, but one that's to avoid illnesses that would be caused by the stuff they use for tattoos. For example, remember, certain types of makeup in the past actively used lead. For example, the Egyptians. So their types of makeup would use lead, and of course, putting creams filled with lead all over your face kind of poisons you, albeit slowly. Especially since it's around your openings, your eyes and stuff, and all those soft membranes that are more absorbent of dangerous chemicals. So certain types of makeup and stuff back then would be very dangerous. Same thing with piercings and tattoos. Also, it was to set the Jewish people apart. For example, there were many tribes around the Jews back then that were very active in using tattoos and piercings. And so the idea of the Jews not having those things was to separate them as a people from their neighbors so that they would be more of a sense of community and tribal consolidation. Basically, it was to help the society grow and function as a more cohesive group, and so that they would have more of a sense of community and grow better as a nation. But also because a lot of times back then, the ways of giving tattoos or piercings, well, was less than hygienic and could lead to illnesses, both in terms of how it was done, but also in the chemicals used for the tattooing. So it was a health issue. Same way, like there's certain rules that were set up because of moral precepts, some that were set up because there were literally rules from God, but also there's huge segments of rules that are not things from God. They're not even things to do with morality. They're things to do with health or making the society function better. Like a lot of the rules that take place in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy in the first 5 books of the Bible. Because the Bible, at least as we have it in the King James Version, of course the Catholics have a few extra books added as well, and of course you have many Apocrypha. After all, many of these books and stuff were available since long before Jesus. It's just that not only within the Jewish communities, but also within the Christian communities, several hundred years after Jesus, they went through and decided what they wanted to consider as canon, because they wanted to consolidate things. Basically, what they felt, and of course, since then, of course, we have many denominations of all religions, particularly, though, Jewish and Christian. Though Christians, the main 3 divisions you could consider would be Orthodox and Catholic and Protestant. Though, of course, the main division between Catholic and Orthodox occurred because, well, the religion spread over a very large place of land to where the people couldn't actively communicate with each other. So you had the part of the Catholic Church that was, in Vatican City with the Pope. But then you had where it spread so much, because keep in mind with the Roman Empire, when it collapsed, it initially split into 2 groups, including the Byzantine. So you had not only each group in very different parts of the world, but you also had people that had to figure out things for themselves, because they were going from generation after generation after generation where these 2 groups of Christianity had no contact with each other. So that's the largest reason why Catholics and Orthodox, though of course I'm sure if there's anyone out there who is Catholic or Orthodox, you feel free to share your thoughts on anything I'm leaving out. But I would say the main reason why these 2 groups are so different is because they were separated by such a large geographical area. And of course, electricity didn't exist back then. It wouldn't exist for at least 1,000 years. So it made communication very difficult. And in fact, that's perhaps the biggest reason why the Roman Empire fell back in the past, was poor communication. Because how on earth could the emperor, how could Caesar be an effective ruler if he doesn't know what's happening? If something's happening in a far reach of his kingdom, well, the only way he knows is if somebody comes on horseback. And by the time someone comes to tell him that message, it took several weeks to get to Caesar. And now, even if Caesar has an immediate decision he wants to give immediately, it'll take weeks and weeks for that message to get back to where it came from. It made communication very slow and difficult. The flow of information was very slow. Whereas nowadays, it's the complete opposite. Not only does television and electricity exist, but heck, with the flow of information with the internet, most presidents, both Joe Biden and Trump, like even when Joe Biden was still president, he was actively, putting out information via Twitter faster than he was via official press release. And even then, think about how incredible that is, that a president of the country could just have a press conference and you could have live televised images of that video broadcast across the entire world, even into the astronauts in the International Space Station. They could watch a live broadcast of a person on Earth talking. So communication's huge. Though, of course, then the Protestants is, like 15th century, like 500 plus years ago, there were complaints about corruption that was occurring within the Catholic Church. Many of the priests were abusing their authority, and many of the parts of the church were basically becoming merged with many of the actual government, to where the church and the government were one, and there was no separation of church and state. And a lot of times the church was not only being corrupt, but they were exuding too much power and control over people. They were censorship. They were controlling people in terms of money, in terms of what they could say, and of course forcing them to not only be Christian, but also to believe the exact precepts they want. Whereas modern times, one, it's your choice if you believe, and even then, there's many different denominations, and you don't have to even agree with any set denomination. You can simply decide to think for yourself. I mean, that was one key thing about the King James Bible that was so revolutionary, was the idea that you could have and again, that was largely possible due to the printing press and the removable type print sets, which made it possible, because before that you had to literally write out every Bible individually, word for word. Now you could just mass produce it. So the idea was this: you could have a massive production of Bibles to where everyone could have a Bible, and it could be in their own native language, and people could be more literary. People could read. Whereas at one point in the past, many people couldn't even read their own language. They couldn't read at all. They couldn't even read their own language. And most of the Bibles were rare and hard to come by, usually just owned by the priests. And a lot of times they were not even in the language they had. They were in Latin or Greek, which a lot of people didn't even speak anymore. Which means at that point, the priest could literally say the Bible says whatever, and no one could disagree because no one could even read the Latin or Greek. And even then, they couldn't even have access to the Bible. Whereas nowadays, everyone has access to a Bible in any language they want, and they can freely study it themselves in their own home. They can just sit and read the Bible themselves. But the other thing is this. Take even Protestants. There's hundreds of denominations of Protestants, because technically all a Protestant is a Christian that doesn't conform to the Catholic or Orthodox Church. That's it. That's technically all a Protestant is. The most clean definition of it of all is a Protestant is a Christian who does not conform exactly to what is considered Orthodox or Catholic. So you're someone who believes in Jesus, but you're not an Orthodox, and you're not a Catholic. That's basically what that is. But of course, you have many people that have many different disagreements on that. And of course, you have many very psychotic people that have had certain interpretations of things. I'll leave it to you to decide which parts are psychotic. Some people would disagree with many things. I am a very strong believer in Jesus, and of course it's the same God in the Jewish Bible. The only difference is, the Jews just don't accept Jesus as the Lord and Savior. And of course, even then, with the Jews, you also have the Talmud and many other books that are written by rabbis themselves, which are collections of, in much the way the New Testament has letters from Paul and the apostles about, to where we listen to the letters that they themselves wrote, the people that were direct, because that's mainly what the New Testament is like, the Gospels are stories of those who were with Jesus, of Jesus' life. And then Acts is what they did after Jesus was dead. And of course after he resurrected. But then the rest of the New Testament is the letters and communications of the people after Jesus, and the decisions that they were coming to, and how they, felt they should live life, and how to interact and how to spread the word of Jesus so that everyone would know. Whereas the Old Testament is predominantly history. Genesis is history from the beginning up until Moses. Exodus is basically all the stuff with Moses, including, leaving of Egypt. Now, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, and Numbers are a large degree of precepts and rules. And many of them are not necessarily religious rules, though, of course, many people who would consider themselves extremely devout in both Christians or Jews would disagree with me on that. And that's me just saying I disagree with them. My scalp is itchy. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying that's not my opinion of it. I'm saying as opinion because I can't necessarily say absolute certainty that I am correct. All I can say is I don't see a rule about how to scrape mold out of the side of a building as a religious. And in fact, there's also rules about that, about the crops thing I was talking about earlier that America has, which we did because of the effects of the Great Depression. Whereas there were actually precepts like that in the Bible to avoid that same problem. Now, there's other issues. Like the tattoo rule. I would say that's to separate the Jews from the people that were around them, to not be mixed with foreign cultures, and to just be better. But also, it's just to be hygienic and health reasons. Same way there were rules about not eating pork or shellfish. I would say the predominant reason for this is because if pork or shellfish are not properly cleaned and prepared, they are a huge source of foodborne illness. And obviously you don't want people to constantly be getting food poisoning and getting sick, especially when you don't have proper modern medicine to treat them. So largely, the reason why you don't eat pork or shellfish is for health reasons, so you don't get food poisoning. There's also the fact that eating a large amount of pork or bacon all the time is perhaps not healthy for your heart or your liver. So I don't know if there was issues of people getting heart disease back in biblical times or not. But hypothetically, if someone were to be eating nothing but pork all the time, because after all, there's less travel and there's not trains or food preservatives, so you don't have access to as much of a wide array of food variety. So if there's people around you that are just raising a bunch of pigs all the time, there's a good chance that maybe your only source of meat available would be bacon, and of course it might be the main source of food available, which then means not only is the predominant type of food you're eating meat, but also means that the only meat you're eating is bacon. So I would imagine that if you were to eat predominantly bacon every single day, it would have heart issues and perhaps obesity, and maybe even blood pressure and increased strokes and heart attacks from blood clots. But I would say the biggest reason that ties into Hinamazawa syndrome, just as I was saying with the whole issue of mad cow disease, is this. And again, there's issues about not eating the living flesh of animals or anything like that, but again, it's health reasons. I would say it's not a religious or moral reason to not eat. No, I would say also, yes, I would say morally, I would think it's immoral to eat human flesh. But I would say the biggest reason not to eat human flesh is that physically it's not healthy. It's not efficient when it comes to nutrition. As you go higher up the food chain, animals use more food to live. For example, plants use all the food, you make the energy and don't use much energy. But of course, then you have a certain amount of energy units within the food. If you eat the plant, well, you get the energy in the plant, but also minus the energy the plant needed to live. No, say if you eat a cow, it ate the grass. Now, humans can't eat grass because cows have a special enzyme inside their stomach and 4 stomachs that allow them to eat the grass. Humans, we don't have that enzyme. So when it comes right down to it, we can't eat grass because we lack the proper chemicals inside our body to break that down correctly. That's why we can't eat grass. The reason also, there's also a chance it could be some types of germs or issues like that would make you sick. But predominantly, humans cannot eat grass because we just don't have the correct enzyme inside our stomach that allows us to break it down properly. But the cow eats the grass, it has to use some of that energy to live itself. But it's getting its energy from the grass. So technically, when you eat the cow, you're getting energy from the grass initially, just less of it. But we just can't eat grass because we don't have the enzyme to break that down. But I'm just saying, the further you go up, so it's just not very efficient to eat a human. Plus, humans are not seen as tasty by most animals either. Granted, animals will eat humans, especially if they're hungry. In fact, there was an issue about 200 years ago when they were building a railroad. I think it was actually late 100s, so less than 200. But I can't remember the exact years, but I would say maybe 150 to 200 years ago, they were building a series of railroads through Africa. Anyway, there was an issue where these men, like there was, obviously you need a large workforce of men to build a fucking railroad. But then lions started stalking the people, and they would sneak into people's tents, and they would rip the people screaming out of their tents as they were sleeping at night and start eating them. So eventually this guy from somewhere in Europe, went there because he heard about these, violent lions, and the railroad company was offering to pay him a mass amount to hunt these psycho lions that were like mass murdering. There was 2 lions, and they ate like 400 to 500 people, confirmed, possibly even more. When the hunter shot and killed those lions, it wasn't until after they killed the lions they figured out why the lions were eating the humans. And the answer was this: because the lions had dental problems. They had rotted teeth. So, because they had some of their teeth broken and all that, gazelles and other animals like that, gazelles and antelopes and stuff, have much tougher, harder hides and stronger bones than humans. Which basically meant that they were too hard to eat. Basically, we're talking about, we were Jell-O. We were the soft alternative to food. Basically, it's like, imagine if you're like, all your teeth are brittle and your choices were to eat like very hard, crunchy food or to eat like chocolate pudding. You'd have the chocolate pudding because your teeth are too brittle to eat the harder food. That's why the lions were so vicious. It wasn't because they were psychotic or violent. It's because we were the gummies. We were gummies. We were the safest thing for them to eat because all of the other animals were just too painful for their teeth. So it was a dental problem. But yeah, a lot of animals will behave a certain way, and of course you can eat certain things. But predominantly animals don't eat humans. One, because, many animals have an instinctive fear of humans. Because we're very different, because we're dangerous, and because a lot of times we're surrounded by things like we're in groups, we're surrounded by large buildings, electricity, even campfires. Fire itself was meant as a deterrent in many situations. By having a fire going in your camp, it kept animals away. And because animals instinctively know that if you go to a place and you kill a human, the humans will all come and attack you. It's largely why humans also don't fuck with bees. Because here's the thing. Yes, a sting from a single bee fucking sucks. And if you're allergic, it can kill you. But if you're an average person, 1, even 3 or 4 bee stings won't even hurt you. It'll hurt, like owie, owie, but it won't be a serious issue. You might put some ice on it, but it's not. But here's the thing. In addition to the fact that there's a small thing stabbing you, every bee stinger that goes in you has a small sac attached to it, full of poison. Now, the reason why it doesn't kill you is because that poison's, it's too small of a dose. But if you had 100 bees sting you, it will kill you. Now, the reason why humans predominantly try not to fuck with bees or wasps and shit is because many insects and animals, but predominantly insects most of all, use a thing called pheromones. It's a type of chemical signature that they more so see. It's not that they smell it. It's that it's like a chemical. It's like it's describing humans as, there's different colors and textures you can see, and then there's also lights we can't see, like ultraviolet light. Like humans can't see X-rays. We can't see microwaves. We can't see radiation. Humans can't see infrared. Humans can't see ultraviolet light. But there are animals that can see each and every one of those things. In fact, there's a type of lobster or shrimp or something, like it's known to punch things or something. But it can see, like, heck, there's even types of butterflies and mantises that can see like 12 times as much color as a human can. Technically, also a gender difference with humans is that technically women have the ability to see more variation of colors than what men can. But men's eyes are usually more predominantly set to be more reactive to noticing movement. Now, of course, there's many variations and exceptions to this. But it's something that they've noticed that when you look at, not only when you test people on certain things, but also when you look at how the eyes work, that if you basically were to establish, same way like if you look at different races of people, technically we're all humans, but people have lived in different climates or certain areas, so their bodies adapted to certain things. So someone who lives in a much more sun-rich area will get a darker skin color to protect them from the dangerous, UV radiation. Also, largely, not only would you have less, whereas you need to be, because you need vitamin D and stuff from sunlight. So obviously you need paler skin if you're like someone who lives in fucking, I don't know, northern England 1,000 fucking years ago. Because you need more sunlight in order to not die from lack of sunlight. Your body needs sunlight. Too much will kill you, not enough. So there's that. There's also the fact that different diets. Parts of Europe had more wheat predominantly than parts of Africa. And so different changes in what diets you have will also have an effect, especially over the course of thousands of years, on your genetic level. So simply put, different types of wheat and stuff would have an effect on the chemicals in your skin in terms of the way your stomach works and hormones. There's also the fact that different groups of people will react differently to certain drugs or salt levels. For example, there's also certain genetic health issues that can occur. For example, I believe there's this health issue that can occur in some black people that can't occur in other races, to where if you were to look at this, you would think it's some sort of bruise. And sometimes it mimics a different type of health condition that much paler individuals would have. But if you give the treatment based on the other diagnosis, it can result in the person's death. For example, there's certain people who maintain more of a sensitivity to salt, especially. And then, of course, some people are more likely to get diabetic conditions. So at that point, and of course some people would say, oh, you can't be mindful of that stuff, that's racist. Racism is where you look down on a different group of people as if they're inferior or bad because of, say, the color of their skin or where they're from. That's not what this is. It's acknowledging that a person's more likely to die from a certain type of medication than another type. It'd be the same thing as if I met somebody that was diabetic. What, is it ableist of me to say they shouldn't have sugar? Or to be mindful of that out of concern for their well-being? It's also the same way, like, say, blue eyes. People that have blue eyes, their eyes are more sensitive to light. That doesn't mean I'm looking down on people with blue eyes. It's that you're being mindful that their eyes are more likely to get damaged from sunlight, from excessive exposure. Same way, I get really badly fucking sunburned if I don't wear fucking sunblock outside because I'm pale as fuck. That's not me looking down on myself for getting easily sunburned. That's just me reminding myself that if I go walk on a fucking bike trail for an extended period of time, I should put on fucking sunblock. Now, don't be wrong. I should go out for periods of time without sunblock in order to properly get some sunlight. But it's mainly this. I should be aware that I don't want to get a sunburn. Same way, it's also the idea of this. Some people have naturally green eyes. But it's also like, I think it would be cool if there were people that had naturally green hair like me on, or the shade of green the eye that she does. Same regard, I think it would be cool if there were people that had naturally purple hair. Or what if there were people that had naturally purple eyes? I think that'd be really cool. But here's the question. If people had naturally purple eyes, well, what effect would that have on their vision? One, would their eyes even be more sensitive to sunlight? Would it be more sensitive like salt or chlorine in a pool? What would happen? Would you be able to see parts of light? Like, would a person hypothetically that had purple eyes, would they be able to see ultraviolet light? Would they be able to see pheromones? Would they be able to see more? Would they be more sensitive to things? Simply put is this. Would there be any sort of buff or debuff that they get? Heck, I'm 5'11", but hypothetically, people that are shorter or taller run into different issues. For example, if you're a very, very tall person, even if you're skinnier by comparison to me in terms of where your body weight is, being excessively tall, or even a big bodybuilder that has a ton of muscle, even if you have like barely any fat at all. Though there was this one bodybuilder that went down to 3% body fat. He was like really, really famous, but it was from like a couple decades ago. But the problem is this. He had a 3% body fat. He died. When they cut him open, his liver was basically dust and crumbly. Like, I'm not saying literally dust, but I'm just saying this. His liver was dried out and it was actually starting to crumble, as if it was dehydrated, like it was actually crunchy. Like, your body needs a certain amount of fat. And obviously, I'm fatter than I should be. But I'm just saying this. Your body needs it. One, for insulation and certain cushions, but also your body needs it in order to make your organs work. Your brain is predominantly fat. Okay? Your body requires fat also for hormone issues. Your body can't produce many chemicals, whether it be testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, or even brain chemicals like dopamine or serotonin, all that stuff, unless you have fat to work with. Your body needs that. So it's a functional part of the way your blood works for energy and for the way your body and your brain function. In terms of energy, mood, muscle building. But yeah, this dude was like so low body fat that he died. So obviously you have to be mindful of what's best for your health. But it makes me wonder, like, if a person had naturally purple eyes, what kind of buffs and what kind of nerfs would that actually be? Because like a person with blue eyes, okay, the nerf is your eyes are more sensitive to sunlight. And excessive exposure to sunlight too much, you're more likely to get damage to your eyes than a person who doesn't have blue eyes. Now, I don't know if there's any buff to it. I don't know. But yeah, what if like having purple eyes meant that your eyes are more sensitive to irritants, but you can see ultraviolet light? Also, would you find that annoying? What if you could suddenly see ultraviolet light, but you couldn't turn it off? Like, I imagine it also means the same way a colorblind person, you wouldn't be seeing the world the way other people do. Then there's also the fact, how would it affect your dreams? Especially if you're a blind person. Like, it's be one thing if you're a person that became blind. You would still be able to see things, because technically, you're not physically seeing anything when you're asleep. But the chemicals and the neural networks that show you those images, because your eyes are cameras that pick up pictures and they relay those as electrical signals to your brain. When you're sleeping, your eyes aren't seeing anything, but your brain is making those electrical signals based on what it's creating for your dream or what you're seeing. So you're still interpreting, but it's more so that's also largely why hallucinations and stuff like that can work. It's an issue. It's not an issue of your eye. Because, I mean, if you were to see something you're not supposed to see, it would be either there's a physical thing wrong with your eyes, or there's a physical thing wrong with the part of your brain that interprets the signals from your eyes, possibly even making signals that shouldn't even exist. But yeah, like tall or short people. Technically, if you're a shorter person, you should have less arthritis and less damage to your knees and back. Whereas if you're a very tall person, you're more likely for your bones and your joints to break down, because it's a square cube law of physics. There's a reason we don't build skyscrapers out of wood, because as you square how much surface area something is, you cube the volume, which means for every little bit increase of weight or height you put on a human being, you exponentially increase the amount of torque and force that is necessary in order to move. So like, it'd be like saying, I don't know the exact equation, but it'd be like, hypothetically, to simplify it down, it'd be like saying if you had 1 extra pound of weight on your body, your joints then have to move like an extra 5 pounds of force. So it's not equal. Now, of course, is it 1 to 5? No. I don't know what it is. And it's probably varies depending on what joint, apart, like, your elbows, your knees. But it's, a general thing is this. If you're like a person who's like 7 feet plus tall, the human body, the normal density of bones is not meant for that. Which means you have to be an abnormally skinny person. One, because you need more nutrients in order to put weight on a body that big. Also is this. Even if you're a 7 foot plus tall person, for the most part, your knees are about the same size. And even if they're a little bigger, it's putting more torque on them more than your extra weight is. So not only is it extra weight, but that extra weight is magnified. So if you're a very tall person, you're more likely to blow out your knees or break a bone, especially like your tibia inside your lower part of your leg. There's also another thing. You need more calories and stuff, whether you're a very tall person or someone that's a massive bodybuilder, because that's a massive amount of food that has to be constantly going in and out of your body in order to provide the nutrients to your body. Even if you yourself are a 7 foot tall giant, your kidneys are still the same size. Your liver is still the same size. So these parts of your body that have to filter all this stuff, they're not giant themselves. Maybe they'll be a little bit bigger, but in general, even then, in many humans that their heart grows bigger than normal, the heart itself can't handle the increased size. And of course, if you're an extra bigger person, your heart has to pump harder. And again, that's another thing. If you're a super big muscular dude or a very tall person, your heart and lungs have to work harder in order to provide the blood and oxygen for this big body. Heck, I remember there was this one really big bodybuilder that actually was very gifted at building muscle, but he started building muscle faster than his body could keep up with it, especially with the nerve endings, whereas nerve endings weren't actually he wasn't properly feeling things because his neural network actually couldn't adapt fast enough to how much his muscle was growing, because he was suddenly training a certain way and he was building such a massive amount of muscle. Now, was steroids involved? Probably, because usually the human body has safeguards. Technically, adrenaline. Your body has to be producing a small amount of adrenaline at all times, a very small dose. And of course, in dangerous or stressful situations, either life-threatening or psychologically upsetting, your body will produce a massive amount more adrenaline. But even then, there's a limit to how much adrenaline it should pump. Because if too much adrenaline at one time can cause a heart attack and make your body unable to function. You may be able to maybe shaking uncontrollably because your body can't handle the influx of energy and the rapid increase of electrical signals taking place. Your body's freaking out. Also, if your heart's pumping harder, but you're not really used to that extra, so it's, you might, rather than be fully super strength, you might just be like out of breath because your body can't keep up with it. Same regard, even a controllable amount of adrenaline from extreme stress, in short bursts is okay. But hypothetically, if you were to be constantly stressed out or something and to be pumping adrenaline all the time in larger amount than normal, that can cause excessive wear and tear on your organs. Also, it can cause a symptom called adrenal fatigue, and that's where the parts of your organs that are responsible for making adrenaline, eventually they're struggling to make the adrenaline anymore, because it takes a while to build it up, and you've burned your reserves out, and it's hard for you to use even the normal amount you need for your day-to-day life. It's kind of like the idea of like insulin when it comes to your liver or just your kidneys with filtering. Like, they have to work a little bit here and there, but they can be overused. And a lot of times chemicals that your body makes, you can burn that out to where your body has to. Because here's the thing. Your body can't just instantly produce all the dopamine you'll need for the entire day in 1 second. It's a gradual process. And that's also largely why a lot of chemicals like hardcore drugs are so dangerous. Not only can they cause heart attacks and major issues like that and be very addictive, but say they make your body react to certain chemicals, especially in your brain, like say dopamine. But here's the problem. Not only does it increase the amount of dopamine in your body by a massive amount, but eventually your body will struggle to make the necessary amount of dopamines, even if the chemical drug that's used to make you do that is introduced. Also, you become dependent on it to make that in the first place. Also, the organs responsible for making the chemicals will be overtaxed. And most of all, the neural receptors, your brain will try to balance itself out. Because no matter what, your brain wants to try to find equilibrium. Now, will it succeed? Will it find it difficult at times? Yeah, it's not perfect. But for the most part, your brain wants equilibrium. So simply put is this. If your brain was suddenly being flooded with massive amounts of dopamine all the time, it will start to mute certain receptors in order to make you less sensitive to it. Because your body's decided that, okay, we don't need these receptors anymore, so we can repurpose it for something else. Your body is trying to be efficient. Heck, the main reason why your body really didn't want to burn fat, because your body sees it as, hey, this is emergency storage. I don't care about your aesthetics or anything, or about if we can't jog. I just want to make sure we have this in case there's suddenly a famine, so we don't starve to death. So, even though it's not necessarily the way you want it, everything your brain is doing, your body is doing it out of the interest of survival. It's doing what it thinks is best for your continued survival. Okay, I got off topic. Main point being is this. Anything that's not normally cannibalistic, if it is forced to eat its own kind, and it's even worse, like, if you eat someone closer in your own genetic profile, which means hypothetically, if you were a white person and you were to eat another white person as opposed to, say, eating a Japanese person, eating the person that's closer to you, or say if you're someone in Japan, eating someone else in Japan, as opposed to like going down to Australia and eating somebody from Australia, eating the person in Japan would be more damaging to your brain. But at this point, we're arguing semantics on, how much gasoline is bad to ingest. It's like, well, should you drink a capful of bleach or the entire bottle? Either way, it's going to still kill you. Same thing, it's even worse when it's genetic relative. Basically, if you were to eat a human being that you have no relation to whatsoever, as opposed to, say, eating your own sibling or your own parent, that would cause a much more issue. Heck, if you were to eat your own child, eat your cousin, that would be a major problem because you're genetically related to that person and you're closer to them on a DNA level, which means it's much, much, much more likely to cause a genetic mutation. That being said, even if you could find the human that is the furthest genetic from you whatsoever, it would still be very damaging to your brain structure and the way your brain reproduces and technically does, neural networks. And keep in mind, your brain is the most difficult organ in terms of reproducing cells. Simply put, your brain is less capable of healing than the rest of your body. That being said, your liver is considered the most regenerative organ in your body. hypothetically, if you have half your liver removed, you can regrow the other half. That being said, it's very limited how often you can do that. It's considered less efficient. It's also not guaranteed. It's also painful, even if there was no physical trauma. Like, your body can sense there's something wrong with your fucking organ. It would still be horrifically painful, and there's no guarantee you would even live. And also, the liver that you would grow back, there's no guarantee would even work, and, well, it would be less efficient. I mean, same way, technically, you could live with one kidney, but having two makes it better. That being said, you can still die of kidneys not working properly with two kidneys, even if they're still. And of course, there's concerns about certain organs like tonsils, or adenoids, or appendixes, or pancreas, about how useful those are. Some people still need those. Some people, but largely a lot of people would consider them non-functional. They're supposed to help, but largely changes in our diet made them redundant. But there are some people that still need those things. It just depends on person to person. Your skin is technically considered the largest organ on your body. It's also the most sensitive. The amount of nerve endings. But that's basically it's meant to let you know your surroundings. Think of it like a and of course, like, there's many different senses you have, and of course we could get into paranormal stuff and extra sixth sense. But let's be clear. Technically, your body has many senses. You have your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, taste, smell, sight, hearing, and of course, there's touch, which is many nerve endings. But also, your body has other things like things inside your inner ear that allow you to sense balance or equilibrium, and as vibrations in regard to yourself. And I mean that, like, feel physical vibrations, like, say someone's like blaring a radio. Yes, you can hear the sound, but sound is generated by vibrating physical particles. So it's like you put your hand on a speaker, you can feel it physically moving. You can feel the vibration. Then again, it's also the idea of describing, there's quantum mechanics, which some people have argued that human brains function like a quantum computer. But also, there's also the concept of string theory, which is the idea of there being 11 dimensions, and that technically things function as a series of vibrating circular strings. Like, the idea is this. Think about how sound and light travel, especially through the vacuum of space. Then there's the idea of this. If you could break light speed and make spaceships that could move at 10 times light speed, under our current understanding of physics, that's impossible. But if we are able to find a way to go beyond that and to break that law of physics, well, technically that would bring up a whole new area of math that technically does not exist at the moment. And by the laws and the equations that would exist within that new series of math, there would perhaps be new particles and new... the way gravity is considered a law, that the way things move, and how Earth's 9.98 meters per second, which affects the acceleration of gravity as well as the amount of weight that you feel. I mean, technically, if you were to take atoms and blow them up and make them big, most of an atom is just empty space. At which point, then, it's just a consideration of why you're physically touching, say you're this green toad over here with your hand and not facing through it, would be either a mix of vibrational frequencies as well as the density of how close the atoms are together. I'm trying to talk about cannibalism. Main point is this. Mad cow disease happened because you fed cows other cows. It causes a protein mutation called a prion. And that causes the cow to go fucking insane and start foaming at the mouth and basically act violent and psychotic. That being said, this condition not only exists within its brain. The condition spreads out as a spreadable disease throughout its entire body, which can not only be spread by bite or blood, but also by consuming it. So then if you cut up that cow, what is requiring that much banging to fix my front porch? But the main point is this. If you were to then sell that cow as hamburgers and steaks, even if you fully cook the meat, the protein chain is damaged. And when a human eats it, the human winds up getting that disease. And in fact, rabies is also considered a brain issue. So both rabies and brain worm. Alright, the Jews. Basically, I'm just saying this. The reason why you don't eat pork in the past, aside from, getting heart disease and being fat and blood pressure and, getting food poisoning, is a lot of times shellfish and especially pork, would have worms. And particularly, those worms would affect the human brain. And there'd be no way to treat it back then. So what would happen is a human would eat bad pork that was not properly prepared, and they would get worms in their brain. And of course, back then, there's no way you would know that there's worms in that person's brain. All you would see is that this person is behaving very erratically. They're emotionally very different, and they're even behaving in a less intelligent than normal way, and they're confused, and they're aggressive and violent. So obviously you'd want to set rules saying that maybe we're not going to do this thing that causes people to suddenly become violent and insane. Because obviously if you have worms destroying part of your brain, obviously you're going to become more emotional, more unbalanced, more violent, and much harder to reason with. In fact, you may have your brain damaged enough to where you can no longer be reasoned with. You may not even be aware that you're doing anything wrong. And of course, if there's anything physically wrong with the brain at that point, not only would you be emotionally completely off kilter to the point that you may not even have any self-control anymore, but you also may be hallucinating and not seeing or hearing what's actually happening. And even your ability to think properly might be compromised to the point that you're not coherent. The same could be said of very strong drugs being introduced to a human mind. Whether it be cocaine or meth, any of these things would cause, and of course very strong psychedelics in fact, would cause the person's personality, especially under the influence of that stuff, to change. And while I would consider marijuana not to be dangerous, I would say it's definitely something that would alter your ability to think in the way you would if you were not. Same with alcohol if you were especially drunk. Especially if you're an alcoholic who was addicted to the alcohol and was dependent on it and was always having it every day for years. In the same regard, there are some chemicals that are just so strong, like heroin, fentanyl, opium, meth, cocaine, crack. These things can have a prolonged effect. Even if you stop doing those things and never go back to them ever again, it can still have a long, potentially lifelong, for decades and decades, effect on your health and even the way your brain works. Main point being is this: if you were to eat cows infected by mad cow disease, no matter how well you clean it, no matter how well you clean it, no matter how well you cook it, it would wind up causing the humans in that situation to get that illness too. And what that is in that situation, it's a protein chain getting folded incorrectly. So what it's causing is it basically then causes the physical neural networks that exist within the tissues of your brain to start not being built. And of course your brain has a much harder time, healing from things than anything else. And it struggles more when it comes to like making new cells or even making the neural networks at all. Your brain is very sensitive. That's why your brain has its own separate membrane around it to give it its own extra layer of protection, because it's considered the most valuable organ in your body. Your body considers your brain more important for survival than anything else, even your heart and lungs. And of course, any damage to your brain or to that surrounding membrane or even to your spinal cord, because technically your spinal cord has, your brain has cerebral fluid and your spine has a spinal fluid. Heck, even babies and infants have the amniotic sac and you have the amniotic fluid. And it's said that the closest thing in nature to the fluid composition that exists within your spine and your brain, particularly your spinal fluid, is that of the amniotic fluid that's in. So the main point is this: the fluids that exist inside your spine and your brain are extremely important in order for you to function, to the point that these are the perhaps most vital things for your just continued living, let alone your ability to, well, be you. Heck, any sort of changes on a physiological level, whether it be the structure of the brain, the proteins, or if you were to take excessive damage, whether it be, say, something piercing your skull, like a bullet or something, or just a concussion or blows to the head, or any sort of infection that would affect the brain, or anything like that, or an imbalance to the chemicals of your brain that would influence, say, your dopamine or serotonin levels, it would have a major effect on you, both psychologically and physically. Heck, your pituitary gland is a small organ inside your brain that talks to your organs in your body, telling them what chemicals to make. Your frontal lobe mainly helps with things like memory and, well, your own personality. Some things help to regulate emotions, especially in the back. Predominantly, your brain is cerebrum, cerebellum, and the brainstem. Brainstem mainly controls your involuntary things like telling your body to breathe, your heart to beat, how your intestines and stomach work. Cerebellum is muscle networks and movement, and your cerebrum is just intelligence and ability to think and learn. Also, while it's technically a different thing, your brain technically produces a type of THC. THC is the active chemical that exists within marijuana. It's technically the word for it is called a cannabinoid. And technically CBD is technically a type of cannabinoid too, but a different kind. But CBD does not get you high, but it can help with your body's inflammation and just make your body function better. But technically, there is a different type of chemical that is naturally produced by your brain that is similar to THC. It's not THC, and it's not ever in much of a dose, but your body does naturally produce a chemical like THC. And you actually need it to live. Now, some people produce more naturally than others. Now, more importantly, there is a chemical called DMT, which is a very strong psychedelic. Technically, there's like psilocybin is the active psychological thing within magical mushrooms, and of course there's artificial things like LSD and stuff like that. But DMT is a very different thing, and it's technically a chemical that floods your brain during near-death experiences and while dreaming. Now, there's many ways to artificially increase DMT, i.e., drugs, which, I can't say I would suggest because I've never done such a thing. So, I really don't know what effect it would really have on people other than just, reading scientific journals or watching YouTube videos, people describing their experiences. Heck, there was a person called Terence McKenna a long time ago who discussed this stuff. Even Joe Rogan discusses it. Terence McKenna definitely got into it a bit deep in the conversation, but I find it fascinating to listen to what people have to say and just scientific things about describing what that stuff does. Now, that being said, your brain naturally produces DMT. It's what allows you to visualize images in your head. Like if you think about an apple, okay, how do you think about what an apple looks like without physically seeing an apple in front of you? How can you tell me what an apple looks like? And how clear you can see it? It's also responsible for dreaming. It's also responsible for creativity and abstract thought, and be able to think in a non-linear way. Now, of course, having different levels of this, even in natural, existing doses within a human brain, causes differences to the way a person thinks and even their personality, and even the way their health functions in terms of energy levels and immune system. Now, of course, the people that do it in a massive dose via drugs see some very fucking trippy shit. Now, whether or not that's healthy for you or not, I have no idea. I don't do that stuff. I wouldn't recommend it. And I would say if you ever do consider doing that sort of stuff, you should talk to somebody who's actually experienced about it and take every possible safety precaution. You should know everything about it before getting involved in it, but that is your decision. But I would just say, take every precaution possible, and make sure to talk to people that actually know what the fuck they're talking about, and who have done it. You should do everything possible to be safe, and to do what is in your best interest. That being said, DMT is produced naturally in the brain. And in fact, it's the chemical you need to live. Your brain needs it in order to function. Now, that being said, it's the same way as saying, your body needs certain chemicals to function too, like vitamin C and stuff, or iron. But obviously too much can have unintended consequences. For example, calcium and stuff is really good. Too much of it can cause kidney stones. So can Monster Energy Drink. Heck, I feel at one point caffeine really did give you energy and was supposed to spike adrenaline levels, but it seems nowadays more so if you look into it, the main thing caffeine's really known to do is decrease adenosine levels, which is a chemical that just tells you you're tired, which means hypothetically under caffeine's influence, you are still just as tired, you just don't know it. Though I would say caffeine also does things like increasing your heart rate, increasing chemicals that make you alert, increasing production of things that do produce energy. Like telling organs to start producing more stuff for energy. Or affecting sugar levels. Okay, really off topic. Main point, we're trying to talk about cannibalism. The point was this. Having any sort of damage to your brain will affect your ability to think clearly or be emotionally stable. having anything affected is very drastic, and is perhaps the part of your body that is the most sensitive to any kind of change like that whatsoever, and is the most important that you take care of, and is the most that if something happens to hurt it, that it's the most dangerous and life-threatening, and most painful. That being said, any species that's not naturally cannibalistic gets a brain disease, a brain deformity, because of this. Cows being fed their own kind, they had cow disease. Humans being introduced to that meat inherit that disease and usually die within weeks at most, if not days, because it's a rapid onset illness for them. Now, that being said, that's even though we're not cows, we're eating cows that have eaten other cows, and it makes us ill. Humans, if you were to eat another human, it also causes changes to your brain, albeit much slower. However, if you were somebody who would be constantly eating human flesh on a regular basis, you would get a significant change to the structure of your brain that could actually be detected in MRIs and all those kind of CAT scans and stuff. And of course, after you die, there would actually be physical damage to your brain that they would be able to actually physically see. Though, the main thing is this. Anyone that is, no, of course I would say anyone who's naturally eating other humans and knowing about it, I would certainly say that they already have a increased dispensity toward violence and psychological violence in itself, as being, let's say, not necessarily good people. It's like I'm phrasing this in a way to not offend people that are cannibals. But the point remains. One, most people would never even consider such a thing, even under dangerous circumstances. And I would say, hypothetically, a human being eating another human's flesh once probably will still get some sort of damage to their brain structure. But it probably won't be noticeable. I don't know. I don't think there's tests on this. If there are, it's probably unethical. Like, I feel that there's no ethical way to test for this. But I would say this. We do know that there are tribes where there are people that excessively eat human flesh, and that even the people within their own tribe notice that these people become much more violent and aggressive, to the point that there's times where these people will just suddenly have like a berserker type syndrome, where they will just become violent out of the blue for no fucking reason. And that also the way they communicate sometimes becomes impaired more, and they behave much more radically and more violently. And that's even by their own people who are around them, who are accepting of this cannibalistic behavior. That being said, the question then would be, what happens if you have a human being who is fed human flesh frequently, but never knows that it's human flesh, ever? They're never told ever. They never find out. The question is this. One, would you notice a distinct change in personality and intelligence and in behavior? Would you notice more, narcissism? More Machiavellian tendencies? Would you notice more lying? More aggression? More OCD? More compulsions? More eccentricities? Like, would you notice the person being more psychologically unstable? Would they start hallucinating? Would they have any of the extreme paranoia or violence issues? And then the issue is this. Then the next question is this. If you had somebody who had been eating human flesh for most of their life, even since they were babies, but never, ever, ever knew that they were eating human flesh, and while they might have had some psychological instabilities, let's say this individual never, ever knew that they were eating human flesh, and they never became unstable enough to not continue living, and were never outright a danger to themselves or others. The question is this. This would cause a change to the person's brain on even a genetic level, down to every cell of their body, having a signature noting that this change occurred. The question then would be this. Would that then be a genetic trait that could be passed on to children? For example, if you were, let's say there was a mom and a dad and both this mother and father were eating human flesh since they were babies. And they ate it all the way up until they met each other and conceived a child. And let's say that was like in their mid-20s. And let's say they never ever knew. And heck, let's say that child born of those two people was taken away from their parents as soon as it was born and never even knew who their parents were, let alone that their parents had been eating human flesh their entire life since they were babies. And let's say this baby born of these two people that were lifelong cannibals since they were children, let's say this baby born of them, let's say they never ate human flesh ever themselves. The question then would be, would this genetic change, would there be a genetic change on a DNA level of this child from these parents that were cannibals? Or, the point I'm trying to go with here is this. Hinamizawa village started off as Onogafushi village, where cannibalism, along with the Watanagashi gut-spilling cotton drifting festival, which I don't know what the word Tatarigoroshi means. I might have to look it up at some point. In fact, let's do that right now. Let's hop onto Google real quick and look that up. What does Tatara... Is that what it is? Tatarigoroshi? Gori? I have to go over to Steam. Tatarigoroshi. What does Tatarigoroshi mean in English? Curse killing. Tatarigoroshi is translated as curse killing. Unlike Onokakushi and Watanagashi, it isn't actually used as a plot-relevant term in game. Instead, it and the later titles are generally descriptive of particular themes at work in the story. Okay, so Onokakushi, if I remember, is the ogre swamp, if I remember correctly, and Watanagashi, while it's name of the cotton drifting festival, and technically it does mean cotton drifting, but it can also be translated as gut spilling, from like pulling out intestines. Well, then real quick we go to Himatsubushi? Himatsubushi. Okay. Himatsubushi. Chapter 4, Time Wasting, or Killing Time. Refers to the time wasting chapter, which is the fourth and last question arc. Okay, that... What Now I'm just curious, like, what that means on the... Okay, I'm going to finish the cannibalism thought before I get too distracted on this. But the thought is this. Onagafushi village started off as a people that were eating human flesh to prove that they were above humans. The question is this. If all... Like, let's say if you're somebody that your ancestors are from, like, some part of England, and you found out that one isolated village in England for several hundred years ate human flesh in every generation. And you're descended from those people. Even though there are multiple generations of people that didn't eat human flesh in between you and them. Would it have a genetic effect on you? Does it have a genetic or psychological effect, especially when it comes to the brain and DNA, of all of the citizens of Hinamizawa and any future bloodline they have? Also, that idea of Oyashiro-sama punishing people that leave Hinamizawa. One, it could be, again, an actual supernatural deity attacking people. But it could also be that all of them have that genetic affectation that is from that passed on. And we also know Keiichi Mabura was actually initially born in Hinamizawa, and his parents left Hinamizawa when he was a baby. Whereas Rena, they left a little bit when she was elementary school and came back a couple years later. So Rena was at least old enough to know. Keiichi is originally from Hinamizawa village. It's just neither him nor any of his friends know that. Because how would they? But again, it also bears the question. Why would the Maburas move to Hinamizawa in the first place? And why would they have such a large home in this place if they did not already have prior ties to this? And even then, that also then means that Keiichi's parents, at least one of them, either his mother or his father, are actually genetically, are blood descended from the people of Onagafushi village as well. Then makes you wonder why Oyashiro-sama was not angry at them for leaving. But then, at a scientific level, one could say that maybe there is a type of naturally existing protozoa that exists in the water of the naturally existing wells of Hinamizawa that is still affected via the swamplands. So, after all, I was discussing a type of deep-sea fungus earlier that is growing in numbers, and it's even becoming more efficient at eating plastic. So hypothetically, given a couple 100 years of evolution, we could very well have a very high population of a type of fungus that is able to eat plastic as fast as mushrooms eat a decaying log in the forest. But it could be that when you then leave Hinamizawa, one, it could be that the parasites that would then affect, or the brain condition that would exist, becomes exacerbated by extreme stress, so the additional adrenaline and stuff trigger that response, or affects the cortisol levels. Or it could be that the constant exposure of the protozoa that causes the illness in the first place also keeps it at bay. Once you're infected, as long as you keep infecting yourself over and over, it prevents the illness from triggering. But once you stop exposing yourself to it, your brain then starts having that effect. Which is why leaving the village is bad, because you're not being exposed to that chemical that not only caused the illness in the first place, but was keeping it at bay. Okay. And of course, technically there's 10 Higurashi games. One of them is called Ray. And one of them is just HOU+. So. Miyakashi. What does Miyakashi mean? Miyakashi. Eye-opening chapter. Also known as the eye-opening arc in the manga, is the first story arc of Higurashi no Naku Koro ni Kai and the 5th story arc in the overall series. Eye-opening. Huh. Okay. T-sum high. T-sum high. No, actually, T-sum IH. IH. Oroboshi? Oroboshi? The Atonement chapter, also known as the Atonement arc, the 2nd story arc, and the 6th, the overall series. Atonement. Okay. Mina Goroshi. Mina Goroshi. Kill everyone. It literally means kill everyone. Okay, that'll be maybe a slightly violent chapter. And chapter 8. And technically there's a chapter 9 and chapter 10, but those don't really have... I mean, we could type, what does Ray mean in English? Beautiful. Or grace. Shepherd, truth, my friend, king, darling, sport. Basically grace. It means graceful. Beautiful and graceful. Also, we have a picture of Rei Ayanami here. Okay, how about this? What does, and I'm just going to put plus sign. What does plus sign in English? I'll be like addition. The intention behind... Can mean function as a verb, adjective. It means intention behind words and actions or significance something has. Or the word answers. Okay. Or the average of something. What about in Japanese? Ranges, friendly tone, and text messages. Long vowels, and indicates the beginning of a range to connect a title and a subtitle, or a wrap-up. Okay. Okay, and chapter 8. Matsuri Bayashi. Okay. Matsuri Bayashi. Festival accompanying. Also known as the Festival Accompanying arc in the manga. It is the final chapter of Higurashi in the overall series, concluding the main story. And keep in mind, we'll have 2 games to do after that one. Okay. We got off topic. I should probably end the video. And I have a text message to compose and send. I hope everyone out there is having a wonderful day. And thanks for stopping by. It's already 12:22 p.m. Well, later, guys. 2 hours and 43 minutes. I need to make shorter videos. Bye, guys.